today what we're going to be doing is starting to learn a little bit about how to program in Excel using a language called VBA, which stands for Visual Basic for Applications. So this is a language that is used by by Microsoft in Excel. So what we want to do to start off with is we just want to get you all set up with the correct settings on your Excel so that you can access all of this all of this language and programming. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is open an Excel spreadsheet, and then what we want to get you to do is we want you to save it. But when we say save, and I've already saved this document, you'll see that give it a name, and it doesn't matter what the name is, VBA file somewhere on your computer. And what you'll see is that in the file type below, the standard setting will be Excel Workbook, and that is not suitable for a file with code. So what you need to do is put in Excel macro enabled workbook. And we'll talk about what a macro is, and then you can save that document. Okay, so I'm going to save it now. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got something that can accept code. Now, the next thing we want to set up is you'll see along the top here, you've got all of these different tabs, which I'm clicking on right now. Now, there is a tab which is normally hidden for most people unless they have been doing code previously, and it is called the developer tab. And we want to show that because it's useful for accessing a whole heap of functions which are not normally used by people using Excel. So the way that we do that is click on the file up the corner, just like what I've done, and go down to options, so right down the bottom, and you'll see that there is customize ribbon, and what the ribbon is the thing at the top. Okay, so if you click on customize ribbon, you'll see that what you should have is in this main tab section here, you should have everything ticked, most things ticked except for developer. So all you're going to do is tick developer and click OK. And what happens now is we can now see the developer tab. Okay, and that gives you access to a few extra functions, and it also allows you to get into Visual Basic, which is what we'll do now. Okay, so you'll see over here, Visual Basic. There is a shortcut you'll see there. When I put my thing on, you can put Alt and F11 on your keyboard and it will open automatically, or just go to the Developer tab and click on this. Now, what you'll see now is you'll see an area that's open that has basically the area for doing the coding. Now, before we get into the actual coding, the other thing we want to be able to do is we want to be able to see our code and then see what it's doing in Excel. So we want to split our screen so that we can see both. Now, the way that you do that is if you've got a Windows-based computer, basically there is usually a Windows key with a Windows symbol on one of the keys on your keyboard. And basically when you've clicked on the Excel spreadsheet, what we want to do is hold the Windows key button down and push the scroll arrow. So that's the one that scrolls the arrows up or down of the cell, which I'm doing right now. So we want to push the one that is pushing it to the right, so in the direction the cell is moving now, so to the right. Okay, if you do that, what happens is you get a half screen, okay, for that. Now, once you do that, then we also want to do the same thing for the VBA editor. Okay, so the VBA editor, basically, and I think I've already done it previously, is we want to move that to the right-hand side, and you do it exactly the same way, except you put the scroll button to the right, and so now you have it set up where you can see what what's in the VBA and editor, and then also what it's actually doing in Excel at the time. So it's a much easier way to do that. And you can actually, I used to do it at home, have two separate computer screens. That will work just fine as well. But obviously, if you're in a classroom, obviously you don't have a second computer screen lying around. Okay, so once you've done that, then we're ready to get going. So the first thing I would highlight at this stage is that there's a few things in the tabs there. So if we click on Module 1, that's actually where we are. Okay, so we're just in Module 1, So we can actually create additional modules and have different code. So once you get something that's a little bit complex and you want to separate the code, so we want this module to look after these activities and this module to look after that, that's how they can be separated. But generally speaking, basically for most of what you're doing, you probably just need the first module. Okay, now to start to tell VBA that a macro is coming or a set of instructions. So when we refer to macro, it just means a little program essentially. It's just a series of steps basically. That's all coding is. Okay, so the way you do that is you type in sub, okay, and that's the command that tells us that there is a set of instructions coming, and then you've got to give it a name. Now, whenever you give a macro a name, it should be something that makes sense, because once you get several macros in a row, or you get lots of code, it can get really confusing really quickly. So whenever you're doing any naming of items, they should be names that make sense. So I'm just going to call this one first macro. Okay. Now what you'll notice is the way that I've done that is I've got an underscore in the middle, and the reason for that is that if I leave any spaces in the name, like I do that, it will give me an error. So I'll click return, it says I'm not happy, and so you'll see this is the first time you'll see when the edit is not happy, you will get a message, something like that, telling us, there's something wrong. Okay, so the way to fix that, just make sure it's one continuous word. So it could be just first macro, all one word, or I like to use underscores because it separates words. Okay, and once I click return, what happens is it automatically puts in end sub, and you'll also notice that the commands turn blue. So you have the command, and then you have a name that's in black. Okay, so basically all that's there right now is simply that the name of the macro, some space in between, I'll just create a couple of spaces, and then the command at the end, which is basically this is the end of the program. Okay, so it means that I can put additional instructions below it for other macros that do different things. Okay, so the first thing we want to learn about is how to get the computer, the programming to do something. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll get you to use MessageBox. Now MessageBox is really very useful, particularly for debugging programs, and you'll see why later on. Okay, so the command there for MessageBox is msgbox. Okay, now if I want to put in a text message, so I'm going to put in hello world, I've got to put talking marks around it. So I'll put in hello world, and if I click that, then basically my code is ready. And the way that I can test it is, you'll see I need to click inside, somewhere inside the macros. If I click outside, it'll ask me questions like, is this what you want me to run? Whereas if I click inside, it'll just run it. So if I push the play button, run, okay, I get a message box up here that's saying hello world, which is what I'm telling it to do. So the command is basically display a message box that says this. Okay, so that is a really useful command. And whenever you get a new command, what I find happens with me, and I'm sure it'll happen with you as well, is that I don't actually remember the code very well. So what I do is that I actually keep commands in an Excel spreadsheet. So what I would highly recommend that you do is have, say, get rid of that, have something saying rename commands. Okay, and that will, and we can say, well, that's what MessageBox does. So we can say, well, MessageBox, you know what it does. Okay, so that way you're building up it's like building up a language, you're building up more and more of your information. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we will now do a couple of things. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to put in the number 10. So if I put in the number 10 and you'll see that there it's in cell A1, I can actually put in range bracket cell range, whoops, A1. And so what I can do there is that I can push play and it will display the value that's in that cell. So if and I would highly recommend whenever we're doing these sort of things, you want to try lots of different things as you're working through the videos, because that's how you learn much more quickly. So if I mess around, so I'm going to change that to 7, what does it do? Push my play button. Yep, fantastic, gives me 7. So whatever value's in there, it's going to display. Now, this is how you actually reference cells. Now, in this particular case, though, and we'll show you right now, is that the macro, if I create a new sheet, so I've just created a new sheet here, and I run it again on this sheet, okay, it gives me, when I run it, it says it's blank. Now, the reason it's blank is because it's not, when I'm on this sheet, it's referencing the cell from A1. So if I put in a value of 3, for example, okay, it displays 3. Now, if I switch to a second sheet and do it again, okay, you can see that what's happening there is that this macro is dependent upon which sheet you're clicked on. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to fix that. There are reasons why you wouldn't do that, but in a lot of cases you want to be more precise, because it means you end up with macros that can be a little bit dangerous in destroying your data. Okay, so the way we can do that, and I always do this unless there's a reason not to, is I put in work sheets, and you need to be exact about this, and then I put in the name of the sheet. So if I want this to display for sheet 1, put in the name, okay, in brackets, and then a dot in between. Okay, so that means that now when I push play, I get 7 still. Okay, but if I go over here and I'm on this sheet here, on sheet 4 instead of sheet 1, this should still display 7. So it's going specifically referencing that specific cell on that specific sheet. Okay, so that's how you would reference precisely a cell. Okay, so if we want to put a value in, so if we want to put in a second line of code, and I'm always lazy, always copy code, and then let's say we want to give it a value, and you'll notice that when I put in a text value, I had to put in talking marks. Now, if I just put in a numeric value, I don't have to. I can just put in the value 6 or whatever and push play. Okay, okay, and so what we now have is we have something that will display on a message box. Whatever value I put in here is going to be displayed as a message box, because once I run the macro, it's going to change the value to 9 and then display it in a message box. Okay. All right. So at this point, that's useful. But now what we want to do is we want to try and get it to actually give you a more useful response. So we might, for example, say that we want the message that's given to the user to be a little bit more explicit. So you might say something like the value of cell 1A is 9, as an example. And we could do this, we could get this program to display it by doing a couple of different things. So the first thing we could do is we could just simply say, okay, we want it to say the value of cell A1 is 9. Okay. If we hit the button, no problem, and out comes your value. However, if I go and change that to 12, for example, and push play again, that statement is now wrong, because the value of A1 is no longer 12. So what we want to do is we want to make this statement dynamic so that it changes with what's going on. So the way that we can do that is that we can put a comma. Okay, and it's a good idea to make sure if you're putting words together, you got to leave a space at the end for whatever the value is. And, so you use the and symbol. And then we want to put in the cell reference, whoops, which is this. I'm going to copy. So the reason it's red now is because I haven't completed the statement properly. So the computer is highlighting there's a syntax error in this line. Okay, now I've put it in. Okay, now it's happy. So now when I push the play button, I get the correct value. Okay, so what you've done is create a dynamic value, a dynamic change. So no matter what I put in, okay, and to make sure whenever you're doing these code that you actually put in a few different values to test that it's working. This piece of the section is working as you would expect. So I put in 18 and it gives me the correct value. Okay, so now I've got myself a little bit of code which is good, that's working. Okay. Now the last thing that we want to do too is that whenever you're writing code and it gets complex, what you can actually do is put in comments. Okay, so this is also another way that you can remind yourself what code does and go into these modules. So for example, if you have a code here and you want to create a new macro and you want this piece of information down here somewhere, for example, you can just go in and copy it. But if you, often what you'll find is as you do more and more code that you don't quite remember what the code actually does. So the way you do that is on your keyboard where the talking marks is, there's actually a single quotation mark like that, and then you can put in comments which will come up in a green color. So we put in the comment enters the value 18 into cell A1. Okay. Once I do that, what that's doing is leaving a bit of comment. So as soon as you leave this little mark at the start, it basically the VBA or whatever information is in this line is ignored as far as the code is concerned, which means you can just leave comments in all the way through. So we'll do it again, message box. Okay, so we've documented our code as we go. Now this may seem a little bit over the top at this stage, but as I said, it does get a lot more complex quite quickly. Alrighty, so now that you've had hopefully had a bit of play and you've done your first code, we're going to get you to do your first little task that you will need to upload onto Google Classroom. And that is to create an Excel spreadsheet that does a couple of the following things. Oh, actually, I haven't shown you. Sorry, I haven't shown you how to connect this to a button. Sorry, that's the last thing we'll show you, and then we'll get back to asking you. Sorry about that. So if we want now, if we've got a macro here, one of the things that is a problem is that unless you have if you're making the spreadsheet for someone else, you don't want them to have to go into the VBA editor to activate the macro. You want some way for the user to be able to activate it on the sheet. And the way you can do that is by adding a button. So if you go to insert, I think it is, and you'll see all these different controls and forms and that sort of thing. Okay, and we're going to add a button by clicking that, and you'll get this little square arrow. And what you do is hold the left mouse button down and just spread to whatever size you want. So if you want the button to be enormous, you can do that, or if you want it this size. Okay, and as soon as you release the mouse button, what the computer does is it wants you to assign a macro. So which program do you want me to run upon this button being clicked? Now we've only got one macro there, so we'll do that. We'll click OK, and we've got a button which we can change the name. Change the name to, say, first macro. So now when I run my macro, and I'll put them just so you can see it's changed. I'll put it in there, 12 in again. Okay, when I click the button, okay, the program runs until it's finished. Okay, so that's how you insert a button. Okay, now onto the task for you guys. What you need to do now on Google Classroom is that you need to create a worksheet that has a macro that is activated by a button. So you've got to create a button just like what we've done, and the macro should display values from two different cells in a message box. So that might be, for example, two parts of a message. It might be my birthday is on, and then the second cell might have the date. My name is, the second person has a date. Okay, so that's your task for today. So we want to make sure that you can do that. So produce that for us, upload it into Google, and make sure you ask lots of questions and try out your code regularly. Okay, guys, catch you later.